Well, the Public Religion Research Institute is an American, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization which researches the intersection of religion, values, and public life. A survey that it just released a few weeks ago indicates that the percentage of Americans who can be identified as religiously progressive is currently a lot larger than we might think, and what's more, is likely to grow over time. Their analysts do admit, as we are well aware of here in Texas, that in the United States in 2013, religious conservatives may hold an advantage over religious progressives in terms of size and homogeneity. But the survey also finds that while 28% of all Americans are religious conservatives, 38% are religious moderates, and 19%, almost 1 in 5, of all Americans are religious progressives. And additionally, 15% of all Americans are non-religious. If this survey is accurate, and the Public Religion Research Institute seems to be a very reputable organization, that means that right now, at this very moment in time, if only 28% of Americans can be identified as religious conservatives, 72%, close to 3/4 of the American public are, well, not. What's even more encouraging for religious progressives, I think, is that an analysis of the survey responses by the ages of the respondents shows a clear and rather dramatic trend toward greater and greater religious liberalism in the United States as older people are replaced by succeeding generations. Whereas almost half of the silent generation and 34% of my generation, the baby boomers, can be identified as religious conservatives, among Gen Xers, the percentage of religious conservatives falls to 23%, and among the millennials, those born between about 1980 and the first years of our new century, only 17% of those surveyed hold conservative religious and social values and opinions. This data seems to support the assertion made by Professor Harvey Cox in our reading that fundamentalism, which he calls the bane of the 20th century, will continue to diminish in influence and importance as my children, and certainly my grandchildren, take over significant positions of leadership in our society. This morning I want to talk a little bit about that future, a future in which Harvey Cox, the Public Religion Research Institute, and others see progressive religion becoming the dominant form of religion. The rise of the religious left could be called. I want to repeat one quote from Harvey Cox because I think it's important. He says, "What it means to be religious is shifting significantly from what it meant as little as a half century ago. People turn to religion more for support in their efforts to live in this world and make it better, and less to prepare for the next. The pragmatic and experiential elements of faith as a way of life are displacing the previous emphasis on institutions and beliefs." And the survey indeed seems to back this up, finding that while for a majority of religious conservatives, being religious is primarily about having the right beliefs, for religious progressives, and in my experience, religious moderates as well, being a religious person is mostly about doing the right thing. Now, it's not hard to see why these encouraging, for us, trends are developing. My grandparents, who were born and raised in rural East Texas, had literally never met a Roman Catholic until their son, my father, met and married a young woman during World War II, my mother, in the faraway and unknown land of Wisconsin. During all the years that I attended school in my little hometown of Brenham, Texas, there was one Jewish family in the school. That's not one Jewish family in my particular grade, my class. That was one Jewish family in all the classes in the entire school system. But my children went to school not only with Catholics and Jews, but also with Hindus and Muslims and Mormons and Pentecostals and agnostics and atheists. What with today's immigration patterns, the ease of travel, modern communication technology and all that, it's simply no longer possible to live our entire lives isolated from people who hold very different religious views from our own. And when we get to know these people, go to school with them, work with them, play with them, and see for ourselves that they are good people who live good lives and do good things, what other possible response can we have but to abandon our exclusivist religious claims? Even the Pope, in a recent homily, said that atheists, mind you, not Protestants or even Jews or Muslims, but atheists can go to heaven because the Pope said the most important thing is not one's beliefs, but whether a person does good in the world. Now that is a far, far cry from what I learned from the nuns when I was growing up Catholic in the 1950s, let me tell you. So all the signs are there. The world is becoming more pluralist and universalist as our faith has taught for a long, long time. Good news for Unitarian Universalism and our Unitarian Universalist congregations, right? Well, maybe. I hope so. Because you see, like the Reverend Sean Dennison said in the reading that Darrell gave us earlier, I am a person who believes in church. Now, I also know, maybe even better than Pope Francis, that non-religious people who seldom or never go to church can and often do more good in the world than lots of churchgoers. And I also know that people can live perfectly happy, full, and satisfying lives without being a part of a religious community, any religious community. But for me, and perhaps for you too, since you're here this morning, church is helpful. As Sean Dennison says, church is at least one place where people try to work out what it means to be human and how to make life more graceful and meaningful. That church, no matter how many times it has broken my heart, is a community that always draws me back and helps me recognize and serve something larger than my own ego, something like hope, Sean Dennison says. But despite what church might mean for any of us personally, and despite the encouraging signs pointing to the liberalization of religious attitudes in the U.S., in my long life as a Unitarian Universalist, there's one stumbling block that I've observed, which I fear might be an obstacle to our becoming, as the Unitarian Universalist says in a current campaign for our denomination, a religion for our time. And that stumbling block that I see is this. Despite what our faith teaches us and what Unitarian Universalists say, we too do not always act as if, as even Pope Francis now says, deeds are more important than creeds. We've said that about our faith for a long time. Unitarian Universalists have always claimed to affirm exactly what the ever-growing body of religious progressives in the survey are now also saying, that being a religious person is mostly about doing the right thing, not about holding the right beliefs. But I want to ask you this morning, and I'm speaking not so much to our guests, but to our members and our longtime friends, and I'm asking myself this as well. I want to ask us to consider honestly if that is indeed the attitude that we display, or are certain beliefs considered more right, more acceptable than others in our UU congregations? Or do we really feel, and sometimes even express out loud, a kind of smug superiority to people who, for example, might believe in a personal God to whom they pray for intervention in their lives? And what is our attitude really toward people who see the Bible, maybe not as literal truth, but still as the inspired Word of God? What about people who choose Jesus, not the Buddha or Mary Oliver, as their primary teacher, example, and guide? Do we really believe in our heart of hearts that we are somehow smarter, better educated, maybe more sophisticated, just somehow superior to them? Not because of their deeds, how they treat other people and act in the world, but simply because of their creeds, their beliefs. Or looking at a different place on the religious spectrum, what level of acceptance do we demonstrate for those God and goddess worshiping neo-pagans who may attempt to influence the outcome of events through magic? Or New Age thinkers who practice crystal healing or divination? Now, I'm not saying that my own personal beliefs correspond with any of those that I've mentioned. They don't. And I'm certainly not telling you that you must agree with any of them or shouldn't feel comfortable expressing, respectfully of course, what you do believe in the context of this congregation. That's another important and distinctive principle of our Unitarian Universalist faith. We each decide for ourselves what to believe. But let me say this one more time and as clearly as I can. Whatever we each decide for ourselves to believe doesn't matter. All that matters is what we do, how we act. Now, I say that beliefs don't matter. Of course they matter in some ways because our beliefs affect our actions. And one of the great purposes of religion is to help us search for and discover what seems to be true to us and so make meaning of our lives. A free and responsible search for truth and meaning is, in fact, one of our obligations as Unitarian Universalists. But Harvey Cox reminds us that, and I quote something he said in a PBS interview, "The plurality of religions in the world is a check on any one of them, including ours, not to get too pretentious and think that we have the whole truth." He was talking about his own religion of liberal Christianity, but his statement applies equally as much to ours. I'll repeat that quote. "The plurality of religions in the world is a check on any one of them, including ours, not to get too pretentious and think that we have the whole truth." My dear fellow Unitarian Universalists, I fear that we are sometimes guiltier than any fundamentalist Christian of being pretentious and thinking we have the whole truth. I know I am. I admit that I sometimes am. But if Unitarian Universalism is truly to become an influential religion for the 21st century, we simply cannot continue, as we have for most of the 20th century, to sacrifice our humility on the altar of reason, insisting that our hyper-rational version of the truth is complete and absolute. We have to be at least as gracious in admitting that we may not have it all figured out entirely right as Harvey Cox is, or the Pope, for God's sake. There's a whole lot of talk out in cyberspace right now about what the Gen Xers and the millennial generations want from religion. And most of the attitudes, and yes, beliefs, that already make up our Unitarian Universalist faith are exactly what they say they are looking for. They say they want a truce between faith and science that a non-literal reading of Scripture allows. We've got that. They say they want a church that completely welcomes gays, lesbians, bisexual, and transgender people and women into the leadership of the church. We've got that. They say they want a church that offers a loving, accepting community that still challenges them to become better than they are now, and we've got that. They say they want a church that will help them live out their religious values in the world. We've got that. But they also say they don't want a church that excludes anyone, either explicitly or implicitly, for what he or she believes about God or Jesus or spirituality or how we came to be here or why we are here or where we're going when we're not here anymore. It's not that they're not interested in talking and thinking and reading and learning about those various possible beliefs, about those important questions. They are. But they don't want theological arguments or condescending attitudes. They want a church that truly cares more about deeds than about creeds. If we Unitarian Universalists can just start practicing what we have always preached in this regard, we could be the religion, or a religion at least, that the coming generations are dreaming of. And I, for one, believe that we can. Many of our young UU ministers and seminarians are leading the way, and more of us, old folks, are coming to realize that the future of our congregations, the future of our faith, the future of our society depends on us all embracing this generous stance. I know I am trying as hard as my little baby boomer mind can possibly do. In his book, Harvey Cox says that all religions, not just Christianity and not just Unitarian Universalism, are evolving from what he calls the age of belief, which began around the time of Constantine and lasted for 1,500 years or more, into what he calls the age of the Spirit, a new religiously progressive era in which the pragmatic and experiential elements of faith are displacing dogma and belief. I have never been as optimistic about the future of Unitarian Universalists than I am right now. I feel such hope for progressive religion and for our entire society as this huge shift, perhaps another axial age, moves religions and religious people from the age of belief into the age of spirit. So you might as well get yourself ready to live in a new and different historical era. A nobler world than we know today or have ever known in the 2 centuries in which that we have lived. It is coming. I know it is. I can almost feel it, can't you? Tomorrow is almost here, when a new community of love and justice will be possible, when progressive religion that values right action over right belief, deeds over creeds, our kind of religion will triumph over the forces that preach and teach hatred and exclusion and fear. I know that it can happen. Time and demographics are on our side.